Come on in. Yeah, come on, John. Yeah, there's seats in front a little bit. Some seats on stage right. Just settle down. Thanks. So welcome to the first Clean Energy Connections of 2020. Thank you all for being here. Sold out crowd and standing room only. Thank you all. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Joe Silver. I'm the Director of Programs for the Urban Future Lab. We're a hub of programs and initiatives designed to combat climate change through innovation and entrepreneurship. Our flagship program, the Acre Incubator, has been around for 10 years. We've got a portfolio of close to 20 startups that are reducing carbon emissions directly and indirectly through their business model and through the new technology. We also run some additional programming, some relevant tonight. We launched last year something called the NYPA Innovation Challenge, which is with the New York Power Authority. It was an energy storage and electric vehicle charging infrastructure piloting program. I think last week the press release went out. The selected company for that, Zinc 8, is going to be deploying a 100 kilowatt, 1 megawatt hour long duration battery system with NYPA to the tune of $2.55 million over 3 years. So, a successful new technology being deployed here in New York State. So we're going to learn a lot more about energy storage tonight. We are thrilled to partner with Solar One, which we've been doing this since the beginning, as well as NYSERDA, which funds some of this programming, as well as the Urban Future Lab. So one last plug, please sign up for our newsletter, the Urban Future Lab and Solar One as well. UFL, we are soon to announce our annual summit, which will take place the day before Earth Day on April 21st. We didn't want to compete with other programs. It is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this year, and we'll be bringing in a lot of speakers and 10 startups that will be pitching for $100,000 in cash prizes. So April 21st, mark your calendar and sign up for our newsletter to learn more. Couple rules for tonight. This is being live streamed and recorded in this beautiful space. So try not to drop your bottles, try to be quiet. Similarly, the Q&A is going to take place on little 3x5 cards that were handed out at the beginning. If you need one, they're up at the front. If you have a question, jot it down on the card, raise your hand. Somebody will be around to pick that up and give it to the moderator, who will moderate those questions so they are high quality. And then lastly, this should conclude around 8:15, 8:30, depending on the Q&A. We'll be here until around 9 for networking. The bar will open up again, so please stick around, chat with your neighbors, meet the rest of the industry that has been in attendance tonight. And again, thank you so much for coming. This is a great start to the year. We're going to be doing around 3 more of these throughout 2020 and hopefully for many years to come. So thanks again, and I'm going to go introduce the moderator for tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming tonight, and thanks Joe for that great introduction. I'm Angelica Ramdari, I work at Solar One, and I will be moderating our panel today. But before I get into that, and before I introduce our panelists, I want to tell you a little bit about my organization, Solar One, and highlight a few critical points for us to think about as we go through this discussion. So Solar One is a nonprofit which designs and delivers innovative training and technical assistance that fosters sustainability and resiliency in diverse urban environments. Our Here Comes Solar program focuses on the technical assistance side of that, where we work with building owners to really figure out what they need to adopt solar affordably. And to date, we've built hundreds of solar projects with over 2 megawatts of generation in New York City. I specifically work on our Resilient Solar program, where we focus on solar plus battery backup for nonprofit community facilities. We've been really lucky to work with the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery to really facilitate these projects, as they're providing all of the funding. So these are HUD funds that were allocated after Sandy to really accelerate the deployment of these systems. Since they are backup power only, they're going to be really easy to build. And to date, we have 4 that are in the permitting process with the FDNY, 2 lithium-ion systems, 2 lead-acid systems. So more on that to come. But we're really working with public schools, libraries, community centers, places like that that could really help communities recover after disasters. So this was an initiative that was pioneered after Superstorm Sandy, where there were many people who lost power all throughout New York City, but there were specific communities in the East Bronx and southern Brooklyn that were really hit hard and really wanted to be able to maintain connections with their neighbors. So our resilience hubs will be able to provide power for these centers to maintain their critical operations while being able to also serve as a convening place for a lot of the people in the community so they can charge their phones, charge their tools, do whatever they need to keep going and recover. So we are actually releasing our next RFP for the Brooklyn Public Library on Wednesday. If you're a solar or a storage developer and are interested in working on a fully funded storage project, please come see me afterwards. We are really excited to be working on these and the other projects that we have going. One of our panelists is working on very similar projects. So that's 99% of my work. The other 1% of my work deals with energy storage and the 99 other things it can do. Backup power not being an essential thing, but not always there. So before we talk about storage in New York, I'm going to call a few things to your attention, and that's the trend of energy storage costs decreasing worldwide, which is amazing. That means that more of these systems should get built, except we aren't getting there because of the math. The upfront cost and the value stream uncertainty leave little room for projects to pencil. So the storage market is essentially where the solar market was 10 years ago. Everybody's really interested and excited by these projects. They're really compelling, but only the early adopters that have a lot of upfront capital can actually implement them. So we're not seeing very much of that in New York. And while the cost of renewables has decreased significantly, it still can't compete with oil and gas generation. So that's something that's really important to think about, because the climate has already changed. We're not in the phase where we're thinking it's going to change. It has already changed, and all we can do is mitigate the effects of that. So clean electrification is going to be vital to these efforts, and polluting resources need to be replaced with zero-emission generation. Renewable generation needs to be paired with storage capacity to compete with and eliminate fossil fuel power, but before that can happen, the grid needs to be changed to account for the variable generation. Batteries are the buffer that will allow this type of generation to thrive. And then there are the very bold goals at the state and city level for cleaning up our energy systems. New York State's goals are 50% of our electricity from renewables and 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. Sorry, I think I said 2040 before. Anyways, the bigger goal is on the energy storage side, where the governor announced 1,500 megawatts of energy storage by 2025, and then the Public Service Commission went and doubled that to 3,000 megawatts by 2030, which is amazing. And here in the city, we have a goal of 1,000 megawatt hours by 2030. And it's really great that we now have the Climate Mobilization Act's Local Law 97 to help achieve that goal. And so storage is not only important for having a more sustainable grid, but it's also really important to counteract the disproportionate health impacts that peaker plants have in our low-income communities. So everybody wants to be able to flip a switch to turn the lights on, but very few people think about where that power comes from. Peaker plants are often located in low-income neighborhoods where they are an increasing public health hazard and emit local pollutants that can lead to respiratory conditions like asthma and lung cancer. So replacing peaker plants with zero-emission energy storage is really a priority. And then there's the most basic thing that energy storage can do, and it's also the hardest thing to value, and it's what I work on every day, which is resilience. So one thing I find amazing is that after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, so many different people and organizations mobilized immediately to build solar and storage systems and really help recovery, and systems were built. That's the same hasn't happened here in New York City post-Sandy. We're still working on that. But one example in Puerto Rico is the Solar Saves Lives initiative that's led by the Solar Foundation, where they installed solar and batteries on a bunch of health clinics outside of San Juan in an effort coordinated with the Clinton Foundation, Direct Relief, the Hispanic Federation, local solar companies, and organizations in Puerto Rico. And I mention this example because they are a proof point. In Puerto Rico, just a few weeks ago, they had tons of earthquakes and power outages. These clinics were able to stay online and still provide the vital services to patients in the emergency room, people who really needed to have access to healthcare facilities when their country was undergoing disaster. So I want to see that more in New York City, and I think we're going to get there. So we have a great panel ahead of us, and they'll each be able to tell you more about what they do, but first, let me give you a quick introduction. So directly to my left is Stephen Lassiter, Manager of Public Policy at Sunrun, where he focuses on legislative and regulatory policy across several northeastern states and federal affairs in Washington, D.C. for one of the largest residential solar installation companies. Nicole Spina is a senior project manager at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where she leads RISE New York City, a resiliency program helping Sandy-impacted businesses adapt to the impacts of climate change through the use of innovative technologies, many of which include battery storage. Dave Hebert is the director of sales for the Eastern United States at NLX, where he manages a portfolio of distributed energy products and services, including the first large-scale lithium-ion installations in New York City. And Steve Wemple is the general manager of the Utility of the Future at Con Edison, where he's responsible for developing and implementing regulatory strategies for Con Edison. So, Steven, sorry.
All right, that's fine.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do at Sunrun?
Sure. Thanks, everyone, for coming. This is an awesome turnout. It shows the interest in energy storage in New York City, and hopefully that will be replicated in the megawatts deployed in the coming years. I'm a public policy manager with Sunrun. Sunrun is the leading residential solar storage and energy services company in the country. We operate in 22 states. We were founded in 2007 in California. Our headquarters is still in San Francisco. And we kind of pioneered the third-party ownership or solar as a service business model, where we would offer to install, own, maintain, monitor, operate a solar energy system for our residential customers with very little money to down. And the idea being that solar energy can be a very complicated thing, as is the process of understanding and going solar, so we attempted to make it easy. Today we have over 270,000 customers across the country. We've got about 4,500 employees, and we are primarily function as an installer. So we're up on rooftops here in New York City, across Long Island, up the Hudson Valley, and we're not just installing solar systems these days. We're installing typically an LG Chem Resu 10 kilowatt hour battery, or a home battery as we refer to it, which is able to provide backup power to our customers should the grid go down. And while on the topic of Hurricane Maria, Sunrun actually went into Puerto Rico after the storm and installed some pro bono systems on firehouses in Puerto Rico. There's about 100 or so. The reason we did that is because emergency communications are run out of fire stations in Puerto Rico, and they did not have power in the aftermath of the storm there. So on, I believe, initially 3 firehouses, we installed islandable, standalone solar and storage systems, which we're able to ride through the subsequent outages and also the most recent earthquakes there to provide backup power, powering emergency services equipment. So just that's only one of the most recent material examples of the resiliency value that solar and storage can provide. And I imagine we'll get into the wildfires in California a little bit later in the discussion.
Thanks. Nicole?
Great. Hi, I'm Nicole Spina. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. I'm with the New York City Economic Development Corporation. We're quasi-governmental, technically nonprofit, about 500 people. Our core functions are to grow jobs and strengthen neighborhoods across New York City. We do that through asset management, through neighborhood rezoning, through large-scale capital construction projects. We manage New York City Ferry, for example. But I am with a team of about 35 people focused on industry growth initiatives. We're a team born out of the need to diversify New York City's economy to help seed new emerging industries and technologies while also providing support for legacy ones. A program I manage within that group is called Rise NYC. It's a $30 million HUD-funded as well, Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program that's meant to help Superstorm Sandy impacted small businesses mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change through the use of innovative technologies. So it's $30 million across a set of 11 technology projects. 5 of those projects are energy-based, 4 include storage, though the program also encompasses some flood-proofing technologies as well as some Wi-Fi mesh networks built for a neighborhood. There's a broadband equity component to it as well. But we are installing about 20 lithium-ion systems for small businesses across New York City. These will be backup systems as well. Rise was launched in 2014. We're still going strong and are hoping to have these systems online in the next year or so. Yeah, happy to be here and happy to have this discussion.
Thanks. Dave?
Hi, my name is Dave Hebert. I work for ENLX. Give you a sort of a high-level view of ENL and NLX. We're in a unique position where we are both a card-carrying distribution utility, for the most part covering the vast majority of South America, Italy, and Spain. So we're a rather large organization. We're also a very large independent power producer. So ENL Green Power within North America has developed and put in the ground better part of 30 gigawatts worth of solar, wind, and hydro projects over a term. We do have a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050 as an organization. That's no small undertaking for a company that effectively has 77 million customers that we serve with electricity and natural gas resources. A big part of that is what we're doing on the unregulated side for solar and for energy storage. A few years back, Enel bought a company called Demand Energy, which was a pioneer doing energy storage here in New York City in particular. They also purchased a company called Enernoc, which does demand response. They're very well known for sort of curtailing load, doing wholesale procurement. And then lastly, a company called eMotorworks. So the group within North America, which makes up the better part of 500 or 600 people, so very similar to your group, but with a wider range, is promoting all of those technologies. Curtailment and load management, energy storage, EVs, and then wholesale procurement as well. Where do you buy your energy? How do you take advantage of that? My personal goals within the company are really to direct our team here in Eastern North America. So we have folks that are working on projects in Ontario, the Maritimes up in Canada, down the eastern seaboard through Mass, New York, and down into the Caribbean as well. We've been working on some projects in Puerto Rico recently. I personally have the better part of 18 years worth of experience in solar and more recently in energy storage. I like to say my favorite storage technology is whatever works, basically. My first storage project was in Mexico, of all places, and they were enamored with the idea of, hey, batteries are really cool. Let's use batteries. We have a problem. The utility rates are ridiculous. We have to irrigate our fields. Let's put in solar. Let's put in batteries and get ourselves off the grid. On research, we figured out that all their pumps run on DC motors, and as soon as they put in solar, the smart answer was put a bunch of water towers up, not a bunch of lithium-ion batteries. So we really do promote sort of a best action for the use case. How do you get the most out of what you're looking to accomplish?
Thanks, Dave.
So, good evening. Thanks for having me. I'm Steve Wemple. I head up Con Ed's Utility of the Future team. We focus on a lot of interesting things. Reforming the energy vision has really changed the way New York looks at both incenting distributed resources and how the utilities like Con Edison interact with customers. We've expanded that as a result of the new state's climate goals that Angelica was mentioning. You know, the governor's goals to significantly decarbonize the economy, not just the electricity sector, but economy-wide, as well as some of the storage goals. Some of the interesting opportunities in storage, range from customer-sited. You heard about Nicole talking about resilience for individual customers, whether it's part of a microgrid or part of a backup system. Storage can provide, a key tool to help ride through and operate critical infrastructure during a power outage. It can also be a great tool to manage a customer's energy usage. A lot of the utilities costs, Con Ed's costs to large commercial customers is in the form of a demand charge. Storage can help smooth out and levelize that peak usage to reduce the customer's demand that we bill on and effectively even out their usage to help distribute or to help better utilize our infrastructure so it doesn't have to be built to everybody's peak usage. It can be built to a more average use with the use of energy storage. Another great application is in some of our non-wires solicitations, which is part of the REV program, where we go out and actively solicit ideas from third-party developers to install, whether it's PV, aggressive energy efficiency, demand response, or a great dispatchable tool is energy storage to help reduce the peak in targeted networks where we would be looking at large capital investments. And so if we can help fund customer investments in lieu of normal transformers and substations, that can be a cost-effective alternative to meet our needs. The final use case is really bulk energy storage, pairing storage either directly with renewables or pairing it into large components of our transmission and distribution system to use them effectively as a bulk power generator to provide ancillary services to help maintain reliability, to arbitrage energy spreads between off-peak power that will tend to be a lot cleaner and lower carbon and store power and discharge it in the daytime when prices are more expensive, as well as to provide a reliability service to potentially replace some of those older peaking plants that Angelica was referring to. So look forward to rolling up our sleeves and getting into some of the details on storage this evening.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you, everyone. So we've all failed. We're all up here because we've been working on these projects for years, and we've all experienced different things that have held us back, whether it was permitting barriers or other things that prevented our projects from moving forward. It's happened, but we're all still here. So let's start with Steve on the end, and let's talk about the greatest failures you've seen in the energy storage market in your work and what you did to overcome that.
Sure. Probably the biggest challenge, and I think you'll hear this being echoed, is both the cost as well as the permitting process. We had one of our original non-wires solicitations was in our Brooklyn, Queens demand management area where we were looking to avoid a $1 billion substation. And as part of that, we committed to build on our own property in one of our basically adjacent to one of our 4 kV substations, a 2 megawatt, 12 megawatt hour battery in the Ozone Park neighborhood. And it was a novel and eye-opening process to go through the fire department and Department of Buildings permitting requirements. And hopefully, as a result of all of that, we actually do have an operating project, but probably more expensive than we anticipated, a lot later than we anticipated. So the good news, it'll provide a blueprint for subsequent installations. The learning curve or the struggle was just how daunting that task was. The other thing, as a regulated utility, we had proposed to invest in a number of energy storage sites in this coming rate period, and everything is kind of a negotiation. We had proposed to invest in 6 utility-owned sites, as well as 1, what I call third-party site. Everything's a give and take, so we are at least fortunately proceeding with 1 utility-owned site in Staten Island, where we have a lot of solar going in to try to use that storage to balance out what we're seeing as that duck curve effect, when a lot of storage ramps up in the afternoon and then starts clipping off in the early evening, as well as we're proceeding with a make-ready installation in Brooklyn where third parties can install storage. So one of our struggles as a regulated utility is we've got a lot of good ideas. We need to sell them to our regulator and in order to get approval and move forward. We don't always have the flexibility that an unregulated entity might.
Thanks.
Fair. Failures. Well, since I have several colleagues in the room, I'm gonna talk in broad strokes. Otherwise, I'll get ratted out to the organization. We share and went along for the ride with Con Ed on many of the challenges in trying to meet BQDM and trying to meet a number of projects in New York. And I think universally across all projects that we go after globally, we sort of have the same challenges. For as many opportunities that we have that we get to crow about, the project we have at the Gateway Mall, which is a BQDM participant. It's 4 megawatts. We deem that a very successful project. I'll talk about that in the next clip. There are 10 just like it that were complete utter failures, whether it was through challenges from the AHJ, challenges in securing the land, working through all of the nuances within financing, if they're paired with solar, seeking tax equity, seeking ever-changing and more complex other value streams. How many folks have CDG off-takers, remote net metering off-takers? Take your pick on what acronym you have to go chase. The more complexity you have on a project, the more failures you're going to have. So you have to have a big enough population and enough momentum in a marketplace to actually get enough successes to meet the goals that you're after. That's the biggest challenge in the development and sort of the biggest failures we've experienced and what we've learned from those experiences.
Before we get to Nicole, Dave, when you and I were speaking a few weeks ago, you mentioned that New York City is not necessarily the toughest place to build an energy storage system. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, no, I can speak to that. If you look at us as a company broadly, you never know where the next bullet's coming from. Take, for instance, Enel has several large contracts with, Pacific Gas and Electric. You can imagine those are challenging right now because of the financial condition that they're in. In my geography and my personal experience, you mentioned Puerto Rico. For as advanced as they've been in response to Hurricane Maria and for resilience, they are still very far behind and very difficult and not particularly progressive when it comes to net metering and the ability to interconnect to their system and how they treat energy storage on that system and what you're able to derive out of that energy storage on that system. So there are a number of challenges in Puerto Rico very specific to just getting through that process. When I look at solar plus storage in a jurisdiction like Massachusetts, where they've from a regulatory standpoint taking everything they've learned from solar and applied all of the same barrier removal to energy storage, it's actually been pretty good, where you can seek an interconnection and provided you're not over whatever limits exist, expect that interconnection in a short number of months. In Puerto Rico, this can be an annualized process. In New York, it can be sometimes as bad, but not nearly as bad as Puerto Rico. Very similar in Ontario, where we've seen a lot of traction on energy storage because of the economics of how they treat demand. They don't understand energy storage yet, and where we haven't hit the AHJ fire department restrictions yet. We expect to. And we do see a tremendous amount of issues just getting through the interconnection process there. Energy storage is unique. A lot of jurisdictions treat energy storage exactly like they treat solar from an interconnection standpoint. And that becomes one of the big hurdles. They're asymmetrical. They're both load and generation. How do you treat that? Do you have to treat both the same from a nameplate perspective? And these are the hurdles we're experiencing, and really, really long approval timelines and some fairly onerous upgrade cost from the utilities because they haven't really thought through that process.
Yeah. And Nicole works on storage on a smaller scale, but still on a scale that is probably more relevant to a lot of us in this room. So Nicole, what are the challenges you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing much smaller systems. We're doing building scale power plants. They're backup systems. They're meant to cover for critical loads. For some small businesses participating, it means it covers refrigeration. It covers particular machinery. It allows them to keep their businesses running and operating in the event of a storm, in the event of a power outage. But I think what's really been tricky is having to constantly shift expectations. I mean, we envision that these batteries would function with the grid, that they would be doing more than what they were doing, but then we're met with changing guidelines. We were hit with UL's 9548 testing. That was a new thing. And ultimately, we were limited by our funding source. We're really grateful to HUD and to that grant money to cover this program. But because of procurement guidelines, when we awarded our contracts to our technology providers providing these systems, we hadn't padded those budgets to account for what could be $200,000 to acquire UL's 9548 testing in order for a battery to function with the grid. We then had to demote these systems into backup systems. So that's been really tricky. I think, too, from the perspective of EDC, scalability has been really tricky because this investment, first and foremost, is an attempt to understand what storage could mean as an industry across New York City broadly. How could we scale it? How could we really use this program as a piloting opportunity to understand more broadly what the market opportunity was? And what we found is that these systems are so expensive, as they're saying, that it's really difficult to scale. And I think we're optimistic given new policy goals and that they're focused on buildings that are over 25,000 square feet. I mean, really, these are New York City's biggest owners and operators. It's covering roughly 60% of the building area of New York City. They have the money for these types of investments. So I think it's just about providing the right set of incentives. But in my own experience, scalability has been tricky to navigate.
Yeah. And Stephen, you work less in New York City, but you still work around New York State. What has been the challenge there?
At the risk of harping on our friends at the municipal level, I was taking a look at permitting turnaround times recently for residential systems on Long Island, and one AHJ, authority having jurisdiction that will go unnamed, was returning permits in an average time of 172 days. So if you think about the customer experience, right, they heard about solar, they gave us a call, they're excited about the installation, and we do our best to set expectations from the beginning, depending upon the municipality. But if you have to wait longer than 6 months to get that installation, and even worse, when your potential customer is calling you up saying, "Hey, what's the latest?" and you have no information for them because the building department won't pick up the phone and give you any heads up, it makes for just a really terrible customer experience. And a lot of customers will cancel and they'll fall out of the sales process. And as any company does, you've got to cover those costs by slightly increasing prices for everyone else. And this has the effect of making solar more expensive, right? Which then in turn decreases the megawatts that we could be deploying otherwise. So that's the negative side, and I'll stop there. On the positive side, some municipalities are beginning to consider automatic permitting. And I just want to give a plug to a national campaign. It's an initiative called Solar App, APP. If you Google it and Solar Foundation, it'll pop up. There's a website. The basic idea is for more municipalities to adopt online automatic permitting in order to decrease those needless delays on the front end. And then on the back end, the inspector will still go out to the site, they'll still take a look and make sure everything is done properly. But in order to ensure that the installation was done well, more of that onus and liability falls to the installer to do really good quality work, or otherwise they're going to have to come out and fix whatever was wrong. So the city of North Las Vegas has actually adopted an online automatic permitting system, and we're seeing much more uptake there. There's less of an administrative demand on the municipality itself, so they like it. And if we're able to deploy more systems, we're still, of course, paying the permitting fee, right? And if volume increases, the municipality actually earns more revenue for itself. So it's a win-win without compromising safety in any way. And there's a lot of really talented folks working on this campaign. For this, in addition to the Solar Foundation, NREL is also playing a leading role and secured a big DOE grant to set up an online permitting portal that municipalities can avail themselves of if they choose to do so. It's entirely voluntary, but for the municipalities that have adopted it, it's returned really promising results.
You think you'll see something like this in New York City?
I'll defer to my colleague. I don't know. I do know that New York City, for residential solar permits, does a pretty good job, I believe.
Oh yeah, we're all good on solar, but storage is where it's difficult.
So that's a long way of saying, I forgot this addendum, but very briefly, 172 days to return a solar PV only permit. You put an application in for an energy storage system where they truly have no, knowledge of the technology or how they should handle it. There's an incredible need for either the state or a nonprofit, maybe Solar One. I know you all do a lot of this technical assistance already, but it's not enough just to pass a regulation or a climate mandate. The work really begins there, I feel like, for policymakers, for them to go in and then prepare all the people who are actually going to be doing the work and attaining, hopefully, these goals at the local levels.
Yeah.
To be totally fair, though, I do think that we are seeing some improvements. I think that New York City is tasked with something really difficult. I ultimately want these batteries to be fire safe, and I understand that it is really tricky to establish a set of guidelines that's going to cover all of the fire safety concerns that are really important to consider in an environment as dense as New York City. I mean, when we put our first battery permit through, it took 9 months to a year. It was absolutely miserable. We were terrified what that meant for the fate of the program, that ultimately we would get none of these batteries installed. Our most recent set of permits took 3 to 4 months. So yes, we haven't seen them move that quickly on all of them, but I do find that they are incorporating lessons learned from the first set of permits. I think that we have the pleasure and also displeasure of being guinea pigs in some senses and helping to really pave a path within the regulatory environment and help these things to scale.
Yeah, and I think pilot projects are important. And when I first got into the storage work a few years ago, I was really excited by the virtual power plant project that Con Ed was doing. Dave was working at Sunbridge at the time, and they were a key part of that. But now there's something similar that's going on in Long Island. So maybe that's something you can chat about.
Sure. So there's something called the Super Savers program that PSEG Long Island, the utility on Long Island, runs. It's essentially a demand response or demand load management program. PSEG Long Island has now made energy storage an eligible technology for that program. So if you're a homeowner on Long Island and you're interested in solar, you're considering adding a home battery to your system typically for backup power should an outage occur. You can sign up for this program, and a company like ours would essentially operate that battery in collaboration with PSEG Long Island behind the scenes. The customer has peace of mind. We're controlling the battery. And during called events, typically a day-ahead signal, the utility will tell us to dispatch the battery between, say, 2 and 6 p.m. on a weekday and over the course of these 3 months in the summer. And it's a pay-for-performance model for capacity. So if the battery discharges successfully during this time, PSEG Long Island will compensate the system owner, and in our case, that would be us. It's also possible for a homeowner to install and own their own system, sign up for the program. They would have to figure out a way to operate their own battery, which can be complicated. But the idea is that instead of just installing a home battery and having it there in case there was an outage, which obviously has a lot of value, why not utilize the full value that battery can provide by cycling it in a way that meets grid needs and also potentially reduces costs for all ratepayers in a territory? So that program operates on a dollar per kilowatt year basis, which at the end of all the back of the envelope math, we can decrease the cost of the battery by roughly $2,000 to that customer, which brings it much more into the range of something your typical homeowner would consider, given the still high costs of home batteries.
So is there a chance Con Ed's going to bring back the New York City virtual power plant?
So right now we've pivoted into our smart home rate, where we are looking to do sophisticated technologies, including the potential for batteries to be installed at residential customers in really more of an automated response mode. So batteries, as Stephen indicated, are really quick and capable devices. And so if they can be controlled by a service provider and effectively respond to either wholesale or distribution price signals, they can provide that broader grid benefit that makes sense for all customers, not just the installing customer who would have the resilience value. So we're going to start there and see if we can prove that out. And once we get a little more experience with, and especially up in Westchester, where you've got different municipalities that have different potential permitting routes. Once we get a little more experience there, we're going to see whether we can scale it elsewhere.
Yeah, that's important. Scale is very important. Dave, do you want to mention anything about your experience with the virtual power plant project?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of different notes. You know, I agree wholeheartedly with Steve and Steve. Essentially that, you know, if you can get higher utilization out of an energy storage device and you can derive any value out of it, it's better for everyone. That's where you get into real win-win situations. You're providing benefit to the grid, lowering cost overall. The owner of that asset gets some remuneration, so that raises their ROI. And there's effectively little to no ROI on battery-based resiliency. You know, it's variable based on how much food's going to spoil in your refrigerator if it happens to be in the summertime. So it's very hard to figure out, very hard to get a piece of that. It is a shame to have a very flexible, very capable asset like a battery on a distribution grid in any way, shape, or form, and have it sit there and wait for the power to go out. In particular, in an area like New York, where that's a fairly rare occurrence, versus Puerto Rico, where it's a very constant occurrence. That is just, it's not money well spent. I had a financial planner for a brother who explained to me that you want to buy houses, not cars, because houses return value and cars don't. I attribute a lot of that to utilization. My car sits in my driveway, or it sits over at Logan Airport most of the time, as opposed to earning me money. And you see companies like Tesla that are looking at ways to earn money with that underutilized asset. Batteries are much the same thing. On the VPP angle, on that side, what was unique about how we were going at the project at the time was that it was under direct control by Con Ed. So the utilization rate was expected to be really high, meaning they would have the ability to capitalize on that asset at any point in time for a multitude of reasons, whether that was serving broader need on the grid, discrete need on the grid, whatever the case may be. That was sort of the benefit from that. And it's a balance. Do you do, you know, good citizenship model, which is, okay, everybody, I'm going to set a tariff and you just follow this demand curve? Do you do some form of DR, which is aggregator based? We're a big aggregator, so we kind of like that one personally. Or do you let the utility just take control over that asset and really manage their grid appropriately? Those wind up being the trade-offs. And the VPP was meant to be a very specific test of one model and mechanism. It ran into permitting challenges, essentially, which is why I think the smart home project is currently focused on Westchester to start as well.
Yeah.
That has a big piece to do with it.
And just because the virtual power plant got put on the back burner. And for those that may not know, it was really the concept of combining solar with basically a battery wall pack and allowing the customer to have resilience that the battery would offer that solar alone won't.
And pay for.
And pay for, and then utilize that and demonstrate the ability to capture wholesale market revenues when it wasn't needed for distribution needs or for the customer's resilience. We're still trying to prove out the wholesale market benefits through a couple of other programs. One is our front-of-the-meter installation, where we are basically leasing larger, at larger sites, the ability to put in batteries on customer property and connect it not to serve their load, but to serve the distribution grid from their property, as well as the pending, we're in the process of evaluating our wholesale bulk solicitation RFP, where we solicited 300 megawatts of bulk connected resources. And as posted on our website, we're in contract negotiations. At the end of that, we will announce the specifics, prices, quantities, and things like that. But the concept there is to really bid and schedule these larger resources that should be less expensive on a dollars per kW basis to install, because they're bigger, you get the scale. Some of them might be, connected into, large substations, and to demonstrate how much revenue we can get out of that. And so through those demonstrations, hopefully that'll help illustrate for other people the value that these devices can provide when not providing resilience, distribution, or other more local benefits.
Yeah. You want to say something?
Just really quickly,
Yeah.
we are already proving out this concept of a VPP. We're throwing around a lot of acronyms, so please interject if to clarify. But this notion of a virtual power plant is something that we've been able to do across ISO New England. About a year ago, Sunrun was the first company to aggregate distributed energy resources and bid them into ISO New England's forward capacity market successfully. What that essentially means is that we will take approximately 5,000 homes across the entire 6-state New England region, bundle up the solar and storage capacity that they offer, and provide capacity value to the wholesale markets. Two other quick examples. The LA Department of Water and Power, LADWP in Los Angeles, the municipal utility there, which I believe is the largest muni in the country, has ambitious decarbonization goals, and they're only going to get there if they retire 3 natural gas plants located across the city of Los Angeles. Sunrun has essentially proposed to do the same type of virtual power plant solution, aggregating solar and storage from 75,000 homes across Los Angeles and meeting the services and needs or the capacity value that those peaker plants currently provide by aggregating all of those homes together and discharging those batteries at those times of peak demand. Finally, one last example in Oakland, California. We've worked with the municipal utility there, which was and still is currently running a jet fuel fired power plant in Jack London Square in downtown Oakland in a lower income area. And we're proposing again to aggregate our solar and storage systems to retire that fossil fuel plant. So just wanted to throw out a couple real world examples of us doing this now, even though we face challenges in New York.
And that's a really good transition to the next thing I want to talk about, which is success. And Nicole, I want to start with you because you and I have been working on these super novel projects that do not pencil. They just provide backup power. They're going to just sit on people's rooftops, most likely because a lot of the sites we're working with are in flood zones and not be used very often. So tell us about your greatest success story. I think you have a few in Rockaway or Coney Island.
Yeah, all 20 of our energy storage systems will be in the outer boroughs, which is something we're excited about, a success story. One of the providers we're working with is Bright Power. They're fantastic to work with. They've permitted 2 batteries and are finalizing installing them probably as we speak, like this week or next week. One for a business called Banner Smoked Fish in Coney Island, another called Linda Tool in Red Hook. That's really exciting for us. They'll be the first rooftop lithium-ion batteries that we successfully permit and install through RISE. I do understand that batteries that function with the grid are, of course, optimal. They help with our aging grid. They help businesses save energy. But I don't want to denounce the importance of a business having this backup system, how crucial it is for them to stay operational, to keep their employees on board, to not have fear that they're going to lose all their inventory. So I do think that this is powerful for them and that they did not have to make any sort of investment. This is free for them. It's taken a long time to get here. So yeah, we're excited about that right now. We've got about 18 more systems in the next year or so, trying to wrap things up.
Yeah, and your program focuses only on small businesses, right?
Only on small businesses. It's particularly onerous in that because all of the technologies are provided for free, small businesses have to apply. They have to meet a pretty rigid set of standards in order to be eligible. They have to prove they're a small business, which means that they have to relinquish their tax returns. They have to prove that they were impacted by Sandy, which means dredging up old photographs, old insurance documentation. It's a hassle to work with us, and I think to a point you made earlier in terms of customer retention, sometimes we were having trouble keeping businesses on even though we were giving it to them for free because we promised them in 2014 the system is coming and here's what it's going to look like, and then we have to tell them actually it's only going to be backup, it's not going to function with the grid, it's not going to save you money. And, oh, well, because of this new testing and then because of this new natural gas moratorium, your installation is 6 months delayed, and now it's another 6 months delayed, it's another 6 months delayed. We're running into all these permitting challenges that some of our customers, if you could call them that, really lost faith in our ability to deliver, and we had a couple of drop out. We had a few that were facing pretty strict DOB violations, and that they realized that they would have to make big investments in their property in order to be eligible to have these installations. So I think across the board, it's been tricky to keep our businesses on board, but the ones who have stayed with us are grateful for it.
I have the same problem selling a free product to nonprofits.
It's ridiculous.
But-
don't you want this free technology?
Yeah, I like being the guinea pig though, and I like that we're all sitting here working on storage.
I think, too, something I'll add, if that's okay, is that for our program, flood insurance is a big deal.
Yeah.
In that if a business is receiving investment from the city, they are required to carry a certain amount of flood insurance. It's really onerous for a business to maintain, and also it has to be maintained for the useful life of the building, like in perpetuity. That's really scary for businesses that want to participate. And if they are found to not have acquired the flood insurance they were supposed to, but accepted technology for us, they are not eligible for any recovery or support from the government in the future. So we initially were facing requirements from HUD that we were going to have to go to each business and ensure that they were getting the right flood insurance policies. And the battle that we eventually won with them is that we would inform businesses of what they were supposed to be doing, but ultimately we're not going to go around and insure it because it's too onerous, and that we wanted this to feel accessible to businesses that need it most. The goal of the program was to provide really expensive technologies to people who otherwise never could have afforded it. So to then slam them with all these onerous flood insurance requirements was just a bit too much for us.
New York City's so tricky. Dave, you are the only one, I think, who's done multiple lithium-ion energy storage projects in New York City.
We do. We have a few, so we can talk about successes. I want to take a second, though. You brought up a really interesting point. In the audience, if you have a show of hands, are there any commercial business owners? No real users. Hey, we're going. Kudos from that perspective. When we've worked with customers, the real success that we've gone, these individuals have really looked at long-term contracts or big capital investments and stepped into it. It is not a simple thing for a business to stand up and say, I'm going to put several millions of dollars at risk or have that liability on a financial package over whether or not my business is going to be here for 10 to 20 plus years. That, in and of itself, to see industry go for those things is a huge success. Very similar to stepping up to the insurance requirements, enduring, the issues that come along with construction, not just permitting, but business interruption, turning it off. One of our more successful recent projects is the Barclays Center So for those New Jersey Net fans out there, or Nets fans, I guess, technically. Sorry, I'm from...
Yeah, you're a little late to that game.
Yeah. Hey, here, don't string me up. I apologize. I'm from Massachusetts. It's a stressful situation to say, hey guys, I'm gonna shut your building down for 5 hours. You okay with that? When you look at these types of centers, so these things are stressful on the business owners. So from that perspective, it's been great success seeing industry step forward. For our own personal success, just relative to energy storage, and I'll keep it in New York, the really promising projects we've seen have been the Barclay Center, where this is a building sited. It's actually physically on the building, so it's not on the ground. So this is brand new territory for the fire department to absorb. It does sit within a non-wire solution zone within Con Ed. So when the nets are playing and all the AP lights are strobing away at the peak hours in Brooklyn, we're going to cover that with our batteries, so you guys don't have to absorb that. We think that's a very successful project to see that type of asset at a commercial site. It pushed a lot of issues with FDNY, and I think it plowed new ground in understanding, how do you get a little closer to the building, like physically touch it, which is new territory for the AHJs to absorb. The predecessor to that was the Gateway Mall. Again, another participant in a non-wire solutions zone. This is a BQDM project. What's interesting about this I guess technically is the largest lithium-ion battery sited in New York City. This is 4 megawatts at 4 hours, so 16 megawatt hours. It's a substantial installation. It was put to task this last summer. It did perform against its duties for BQDM. So it has been an extremely successful project. The interesting pieces, or the little pieces you don't recognize, is it also was really attractive to the building owner for a peculiar reason. It occupies a space that they had to go and mow the lawn on because they didn't decide to pave it, and we took that away. So not only are we not burning gasoline on lawnmowers, we're taking their maintenance costs down. So you get these little tangential benefits we're actually very proud of. It was also a really great exercise in collaboration with Con Ed, with the distribution engineers, to see how do you interconnect a system like that is customer sited but not necessarily behind the meter, but take advantage of the infrastructure that's in place, so you're not incurring additional costs for line drops and doing what it would be a more traditional approach to front of the meter. So again, it helps sort of open up new thinking, look for new ways to get energy storage out there and not incur costs that you would otherwise be a big detriment to the project. And then the predecessor to that, which I think has gotten a lot of press and is relatively well known here, is the Marcus Garvey project. So the Marcus Garvey project is nice because this sits in a complex that is a low-income housing community, so it serves benefit for that community. It made it through significant challenges in permitting. I think it was the first lithium-ion battery sited in New York City, so we were able to get that through that process at that point in time. It is a non-export project, so it is not allowed to export onto the grid by Con Ed because of the network service that's in place. Another very complex challenge to solve, particularly because the site also has a fuel cell and 6 or 7 autonomous solar systems across this 1 block square radius. So from a technological achievement standpoint, that was a huge success for us to be able to put that project forward.
Great. And Steve, what does success look like for you? You've had a varied career, but
So ironically, Dave touched on a lot of the good successes we've had using energy storage to solve our distribution needs. So I'm going to shift the time a little bit and say, what do I think the future successes are? And without being a spoiler, I think the pending solicitation for bulk storage is a key element of getting to the state's 3,000 megawatt goal, because we are not going to get there. The 2 megawatt, 5 megawatt, distribution installations are useful, but it's hard to picture them scaling to 3,000 megawatts. And it's not as cost effective as doing 50s, 100s, one generator in New York City has even proposed potentially 300 megawatts. So I think we need to think of larger scales of energy storage, whether it's battery technology or other flow technologies in the future, because this is going to be essential for our intermittent renewables, especially here in New York City, where there's a need for local dispatchable, and I'm going to use generation, not as a fossil generation, but all forms, including renewable as well as energy storage. And we're going to need the storage here in New York City, probably connected at the transmission or sub-transmission at the higher voltage levels, to be able to store the intermittent renewables, especially in the spring and fall on some of those overnights when the wind might be blowing from offshore wind, or on the sunny spring fall days when there's no air conditioning load to absorb the sun, and save it for a subsequent day when it's needed, because that's going to be the key to getting towards our carbon-free goal in 2040 that the state has. And obviously, from the perspective of, back to customer-sided solutions, I'm impressed at how, whether it's Marcus Garvey pairing renewables with storage or some of the other resilience plays that customers are coming up with, we're seeing more creative solutions to customer needs that are really going to drive the future and help both meet customer needs and be cost-effective and economic packages going forward.
Yeah. But 2040 is a long way off. We have 20 years to get to that goal. What about all of the buildings that are in New York City? They're some of the biggest contributors to carbon emissions. So all of the affordable housing that's here, do you think that adding energy storage to those buildings would help, or is it pointless at this time because of all of the regulations that go along with it?
Storage is a very unique technology right now. Unless we come up with a different technology that is safer, more compact. But even if we do, let's say we come up with flow batteries that address all of the fire concerns that are in the R&D stage and are potential for the future, space is still a consideration. So not every building is going to be well suited for energy storage, and nor do we need every building to have its own energy storage. By putting it in at some of the transmission and distribution stations, we can share that capability, because a lot of the renewable energy that we're going to need to get to our carbon-free electrified future is going to have to be coming in either on the high voltage lines coming from the north or coming in from offshore wind projects, because we just don't have enough roof space and open space to get there with rooftop solar. And I don't think people are proposing windmills in Central Park and Prospect Park and other places in New York City. So the renewable power is going to come in at higher voltages anyway, or a good portion of it. So it makes sense to then pair some of the storage for everybody's needs at those same stations and do it in scale.
Just one point on distributed storage scaling. As I said, we're installing small batteries that attach on the wall of your garage and are the size of that TV roughly, that are 10 kilowatt hours, enough to power your home, at least 4 dedicated circuits through the evening. Sun comes up the next day, powers your home, recharges the battery. During the recent wildfires in California, we had some customers who were able to ride through 6-day outages continuously without losing power. In terms of deployments, for several quarters in the past year and a half or so, there has been more behind-the-meter storage installed than front-of-meter in several individual quarters. So just to give you the sense of residential storage taking off and scaling, it's already happening in places like Hawaii, given the regulations in place. We don't install a solar system without a battery. In California, across the state, customers are adopting a battery when they go solar about 30% of the time. And just really quickly, a fun factoid I got from a recent Ezra Klein podcast that I would recommend to everyone. He had, I forget the gentleman's name, but a scholar on the program who said, electrifying everything, as a lot of folks are talking about these days, would require half the original energy that we currently use, just given the efficiencies of using electricity to do things like power our cars instead of gas combustion engines. And that rooftop, and if we were to put solar on all viable rooftops across the country and install solar canopies on parking lots, it would meet half the need of that total amount of energy once we electrify everything. So we have the technologies today to do this. I think we need to focus more on removing the obstacles that we've talked about and do it as quickly as we can.
Thanks. So we're going to wrap up very soon and open it up to questions. If you still have a question, please find Derek, who's standing over there, and he will get it to us. But before we do that, I would love for each of you to just, we have a room full of people who are not business owners. How can they be utilized? How can we all accelerate the growth of energy storage in New York City? Is there stuff that the audience can do, stuff that we can do? I know we all need to remove the barriers, and I think these novel projects that we're all working on is a step in the right direction, but how else can we mobilize to get energy storage more into our future?
I'll jump in very quickly. So I cover federal affairs for Sunrun as well. Everyone in the room has an elected representative in the House of Representatives. You also have 2 senators. Unfortunately, the federal investment tax credit stepped down from 30% to 26% on January 1st of this year. And without congressional action this year, it'll fall again next year to 22%. And then the following year in 2022, I believe it will remain at 10% permanently for commercial projects, but will go to 0 if you're a residential homeowner. That's a really significant cost difference. Sunrun was actively trying to maintain the ITC at 30%. And the reason that this pertains to storage, of course, is that if you install a storage system that is only powered by a solar PV system, you can claim the ITC for that storage system, right? So the ITC has already been fueling tons of storage being deployed and added to the grid. But unfortunately, if Congress does not act, it will continue to phase down over the next few years. And there's a real effort, again, underway this year to maintain the ITC at 30%. So everyone has a representative. You've got 2 senators. I'd encourage you to reach out to them and let them know that this is a priority for you.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I mean, the most of us are not going to be residential homeowners. We're renters. We have limited ability to affect the way energy works where we live. Pressure your landlords, have an understanding of how things work in your building. I didn't understand how things worked in my building to a few months ago, even though I'm a person who cares about these issues. So just get educated. I mean, you're here, so you probably already are, but stay engaged.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think if you stay active, you stay engaged, you participate in all the dialogue that takes place, you sort of raise the level of collective common sense, let's call it. There are a lot of complexities around how people take energy storage. I'm interesting because I actually come from the solar industry, and I almost got hung as a heretic just because I said the best thing the solar industry could ever have would be for the ITC to go away. I mean, ultimately, industries that do not rely on incentives grow faster than industries that do. You have sort of a self-limiting capability when you work on incentives. So driving out other barriers, whether they are cost of permits, the ability to get a permit in a timely fashion, cost of, particular safety measures, cost of interconnections. Coincident with the ITC is contract demand, which is a favorite topic in the Con Ed territory. If you're charging that battery from the Con Ed grid, you have to pay for that, and pay for that on a very specific tariff that's not advantageous. So it doesn't help the goal of putting more storage in Con Ed territory. All these little razor blades that ultimately kill the initiatives of solar, those are the ones to go after. That, in my opinion, is where everyone who works in the industry, if you wrap your head around it and put your voice in front of it, you can help sort of remove all those barriers, and you'll see the momentum pick up just like it did with solar in the early days.
So I think one of the biggest opportunities for storage that I think Dave alluded to and Stephen referred to is really pairing it with renewables in the first place. A lot of solar systems are inverter limited, meaning there's more panels, there's more DC capability that can physically get out into the grid. Putting what's called a DC coupled storage system, where you're actually charging the battery, which is DC to begin with the DC from the panels, means you can capture some of that otherwise spilled or lost energy that would have been clipped by the inverter and time shift it until the normal DC production has fallen off, and you can push it out through the inverter, or even time shift it more to into a more valuable time slot, or provide the resilience that's needed. And that's true of a lot of a lot of solar installations. That, in some cases, is also true with wind installations upstate. So thinking sort of outside the box, that there are probably storage applications that us as New York City folks may not think of, because we don't see wind turbines, driving along the major Deegan. But when you go upstate, there's lots of opportunities up there. So thinking broader, these are state goals. Not every apartment dweller, like Nicole alluded to, should have an energy storage system other than for their personal electronics. It just doesn't make sense for apartment dwellers to think of it, but I like the idea of advocating to their landlord, and I like the idea of advocating to their energy supplier if they're shopping, challenge all the way up and down the food chain. Even though we don't have more than one commercial building owner-operator here, hopefully we have developers and other people who will think up and down the food chain and help move us along.
Great, thank you so much. Now let's get into some questions. All right, so I'm just going to throw these out there. Whoever wants to answer is welcome to. How does the recent FERC approval of the New York ISO's storage tariff impact the storage market?
So I'll take a quick spin. It will help. It will not help this year. I believe it's a 2021 implementation of the NISO's new storage roadmap. But the good news is what was proposed will be in place. This right now we have a tariff mechanism for limited resources, but really the NISO's market is only well suited to resources providing a very specific service called the fast responding regulation service, where every 6 seconds you have to move up or down. It's almost like the governor on a car that would on your speed control that would move your engine up and down to try to maintain that steady speed. That's what the New York ISO's regulation service does. The new functionality will let the New York ISO effectively manage the state of charge, which is really key for batteries participating in the New York ISO market, to make sure that it doesn't think it's an unlimited generator that can just operate, for 6, 8, 10 hours, that it's got an upper and a lower limit to its charging capability, but an awful lot of flexibility in between. So I think once that functionality is up and running and is a tool that we and other people managing storage can use, I think that'll help firm up the revenues that we can capture.
Yeah. I'll add to that as well. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I think the changes are going to be positive for the industry. There'll be some lag as they're implemented and capacity markets are able to take it. But effectively what it did is it raised the capacity value certainty for the assets that are going to participate on the NISO, which is great news for energy storage. It means that more projects are going to pencil a lot faster in more diverse areas. So not just in zones that have really high demand charges, but we think it'll help other zones outside of New York City that have lower demand values.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe there was a 100 kW threshold to meet in order to participate, which would of course cut out aggregated residential systems. So that's one concern that we would have, because I don't know on what grounds that threshold was set, but it seems like if you've got, smaller distributed generation systems that can meet the same needs and grid services, it doesn't make sense not to utilize them.
Along the same lines, can FERC derail decarbonization goals as they have done in PJM?
I'm assuming that is the minimum offer price rule that PJM imposed on renewables and even subsidized nuclear and a whole bunch of other resources that could impact generators' ability to participate in the capacity markets. The short answer is there's a bunch of things that New York has pending before FERC. We will have to wait and see what happens. And the New York Commission has initiated its own resource adequacy proceeding to look at those issues. So you got a good crystal ball. I'm not. I think we could be in for a bumpy ride. Where it takes us, I don't know.
Some of these are a little hard to read, so if I am getting your question wrong, please let me know. I just saw one that I wanted to answer. It was, when do you think we'll see FDNY's guide to indoor lithium-ion permitting? I spoke to Nick at FDNY this morning, and he said they're working on it, but we're probably not going to see it anytime soon. So right now, outdoors on non-combustible buildings within the zoning requirements are your best bet, or on the larger utility scale, places that make sense.
I'll contribute to that as well. I'm encouraged that FDNY, although it had to find its way to finalize rules, the variability in the way that they've treated commercial scale energy storage systems outdoors has narrowed. And it was a point in time where you never knew what was going to come next and how it was going to hit you. The predictability of this has actually improved quite a bit. So I'm confident that they will find a way to get there. What's curious, though, is, and a lot of folks in the industry don't really think of, putting a battery indoors, you're putting a heat generating source, you're adding more parasitic load and air conditioning. Currently, there are manufacturers that actually won't allow you to put them indoors. So putting lithium ion indoors is not just an FDNY problem, it's an industry problem. Technology has to mature, solutions have to mature, and the regulation has to mature with it. That entire process probably puts it on, maybe I'm a pessimist, but I'd put it on a 5-year timeline, not a 2 or a 1, or certainly no number of months.
That's inspiring.
Sorry, man. It's not because I don't want to. Believe me.
What are the challenges to use the peaker plant facilities for storage? There are more projects besides Riverwood?
Ravenswood.
Ravenswood. Sorry.
So the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has issued basically new rules on nitrogen oxides, which will require either back-end combustion controls of these old 1970s era combustion turbines, or their retirement, or potentially a few of them are proposing replacements. As part of our bulk storage RFP, we outlined 2 load areas that are sort of load pockets where we actually either need local generation or would have to invest in a transmission solution to unbottle it to maintain reliability. So we were offering extra points in our solicitation for battery storage that would go into those pockets. So storage can be part of the solution to replace those peakers. Unfortunately, it can't be the sole solution because there isn't enough off-peak charging time to charge up and meet the on-peak needs. So you would have to pair it with either some cleaner generation or some storage and transmission. But certainly energy storage can reduce the need to operate peaking units, which will have an improvement on local air quality by basically avoiding the need to start some of these older combustion turbines.
Yeah. This question is for you, Nicole, and I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. How do you manage not overpromising backup resiliency for community centers? I'm going to say for small businesses, because that's where you work with.
Overpromising. I mean, we have overpromised, so I don't know if I am the right person for the question. I mean, I think what's been nice about the program and that, yes, it has been long. We've been running this program for 5 years, been working with our operators for 5 years who are doing the actual installations, but that's meant that we have established a really strong line of communication. We know these businesses intimately. We've been on site a ton of times. I take calls from them every day about concerns they have about the project. So yes, we have overpromised them, but we also have really held their hand through the process. So I think ultimately it's a good thing for them.
Yeah, and on our end at Solar One, we struggle with this a lot because there isn't very good data to size a battery for resiliency. We don't know how long an outage is going to last. We don't know how many people are going to come to charge their cell phones, but we try to estimate as best as possible. And what we do is design our systems for 7 hours of use. We design PV to be able to recharge the battery. Hopefully the weather conditions allow for that, but most of the systems we're seeing are still pretty small and can still power like a volunteer fire department for days on end, which is important. So it's hard not to overpromise, but right now we're still guessing until the data gets there. This is one that's hard to read, but I think it's interesting. Could you address lithium extraction? I'm going to skip whatever the rest of that says because I can't see it. As it relates to lithium-ion batteries. Does anybody have a take on this?
I'm looking at our engineer
Yeah.
on the panel.
I assume it's what do you do to recycle the battery at the end of its life? Hopefully you can cover that.
I think they're
not-
talking about extraction, so like the actual mining of the
Oh,
lithium.
yep, okay.
Yeah. Wow, we're way off into the weeds here. That's interesting. So prior to coming down for the panel, the first thing we discussed is the fact that he's the only real engineer here. I pretend to be one. I mean, to the question, whether it is lithium extraction, where are you going to get that raw resource, or even any other heavy metal that goes into power electronics. I mean, there's no shortage of finding things that have some limiting supply chain within them. Lithium ion is included in that. That's why when I opened and we talked about what my favorite storage technology is, it's whatever works for the application.
That water
Yeah.
tower, pump
It's
hydro?
it is the water tower. I think today lithium ion holds a very distinct advantage because it's effectively think of it like a full blown computer as opposed to a calculator. Same basic premise in what it provides. It provides some sort of calculating device. It provides a machine that does the work for you. One does only one thing. Well, lithium ion does several things. It can be a regulating battery. It can be a capacity battery. It can be used for backup. I think that and the cost curve is where lithium ion has sort of excelled above and beyond everything that's in the marketplace. I'd find it very difficult to believe that we will run into heavy constraints on sourcing lithium before some other technology starts to erode what lithium provides in the marketplace. I think that's true of most things that we're going after, if it is on the front end. If it is on the back end, interestingly enough, we're lucky that there are laws that protect us for the recycling of those types of chemicals. So all OEMs have mandates and requirements where they need to be able to facilitate recycling of all components that go out into the field. So for practice on our standpoint, we take responsibility for, at the end of the useful life of that asset, they go into an appropriate recycling program and are reused. Lithium-ion batteries, if you look at them from a sort of a general chemistry makeup, in particular, if you think about the entire system, these are single percentage points, even fractions of percentage points of the total makeup of the system. 50% of the system is steel, for the most part, when you look at how everything's manufactured, and then other plastics, and then the rest of the components in the cell. So it's not the long pole in the dent. More apparent is, access to things like steel and cells without import tariffs, working with partners outside. That is the real constraint, or at least the temporary constraint we're under today, getting batteries to cost less because we do take the vast majority of them from overseas today.
That's a great transition into the next question, which is why are we not talking about flywheels, pumped hydro, or compressed air for storage?
Like I said, fan of all of the above. We've done most of them as an organization. So we have several operating flywheel projects around the globe. We have hydro storage, pump storage projects around the globe. I'm not certain we have any compressed air projects around the globe, but there's nothing inherently wrong in going after it. Ultimately, what it comes down to is access to the space. How's it going to work in the environment that you have, and what are the costs? I mean, I'm all for using any technology that accomplishes the job.
And last question before we break for networking. There are a lot of questions for Steve, but Steve will be here, so you can ask him your questions personally. So the Climate Mobilization Act is helping to set a clear value for energy efficiency and renewables. Is there any hope for a clear value to resilience to promote storage? CHP, microgrids. Anyone?
So resilience is interesting because it can either be very local. If you're providing resilience for just one building, that really is up to the individual owner of that building to value. If you're doing it for a microgrid where you're creating a community that can sort of sustain operation, and New York Prize is actually exploring a lot of different applications of which storage can be a solution in that. It's a function of where is your little micro community and how much of the neighborhood can it serve, and typically you'll look to both have some life safety issues, whether it's a hospital, police, fire, combined with some essential things like groceries, and so you're building a little microcosm that can sustain a level of comfort and quality of life during a sustained outage. So I think the short answer, it's very site-specific depending on how you're creating your microgrid. Clearly Marcus Garvey, with the ability to operate independently, is a great example. I'll hand that over if you want to follow up.
I can follow up. It's interesting because if you look at it from a policy standpoint, to some respects, we value resiliency today. Matter of fact, Con Ed as an organization and any utility out there today has a reliability standard that they have to meet. That in effect is society's mandate on resiliency for the communities that exist. Whether we go after valuing resiliency as a society and putting that in practice in communities through that reliability standard or through some separate standard akin to the way we go after carbon, I firmly believe if we do see that as valuable as a society, finding ways to fund it, finding ways to socialize those costs is the right thing to do. Independent of that, I think we see businesses in general are starting to understand the value of resiliency, having their operations go down for any period of time, whether it's minutes or hours, is a hit on the economy. It's we're getting to the point where businesses run 24/7, 365. They're required to be extremely efficient. Resiliency is becoming an issue, and they're seeking ways to solve it. My personal belief is that it is more likely a community-style microgrid that is going to be the most effective, because I don't think you see failures on the electric grid that are building by building. They tend to be circuit by circuit, substation by substation. So seeking that model and involving the utilities in the design of that is probably the best approach, or at least the approach I'd prefer.
Yeah, I mean, EDC is really focused on resiliency as it pertains to its assets because of the core function they provide to New Yorkers. As an example, EDC manages the Hunts Point Food Distribution Center. 90% of all the food that's coming into New York is passing through that distribution center. So we're in the early days of doing a massive microgrid project there, and that the resilience of that facility is absolutely key for EDC as an asset manager, but also for all of us.
Just put a final point on microgrids. It doesn't get more micro than a microgrid created at your house with solar and storage. As you all know, as part of the Climate Mobilization Act, New York City recently adopted local laws 92 and 94, which just were implemented on November 15th, which requires roofs on new construction or roofs on existing buildings going down to the decking or assembly to have either PV or a green roof. So as we're thinking around brainstorming about the future of storage, it would be interesting if we ever got to a point where, you know, the city would consider, or any jurisdiction, a home battery mandate, if it were to make sense and pencil out on the cost-benefit analysis, and potentially come as useful and vital as any other home appliance, like your refrigerator or hot water heater or your boiler.
Yeah, I mean, I think something I'll add is that we can see value in resilience and how it's going to add to the green economy. I mean, looking at building retrofits inclusive of storage, but also of just retrofits more generally, that's looking at about 171,000 jobs in New York City that will need to be added. And these jobs are accessible jobs. They're in electrical and plumbing trades and other building trades. We'll have to look at upskilling those people, but we'll also have to look at building our capacity within the energy industry to meet the demand. So I think there's a really powerful opportunity in what this will do for our economy.
Great, thank you. So that's it for right now. Everybody will still be around. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you all for coming here. And please talk to us about resilience. If you want to actually build storage projects and see them happen, we're doing it. Thank you again.